She's not going to make it through the night. So we should probably talk about what happens next. He said it quietly, standing 3 feet from his wife's hospital room door, his hand resting on the small of another woman's back. The charge nurse on the overnight shift at Briar Ridge General was named Olu Adisa. She was 41 years old, had worked the cardiac care unit for 14 years, and had a policy about not inserting herself into family dynamics that were none of her business. She would revise that policy before sunrise. The patient in room 11 was Zara Holt, 29 years old, admitted at 10:47 in the evening, with a heart condition that had been monitored since she was 19. A condition that had been considered stable, that had been called manageable by 3 different cardiologists in 2 different provinces. It had stopped being manageable at 9:15 that evening, when Zara collapsed on the kitchen floor of her house in Whitby, Ontario, while putting away the dinner dishes. She had called the ambulance herself. That detail would matter later. Dr. Jan Biosolale had been on call that night. He was 53, trained in Montreal, transplanted to Ontario 12 years ago. He had the kind of calm that took decades to build, the kind that doesn't perform itself, doesn't announce anything, just is. He had been Zara's cardiologist for 3 years. He knew her chart the way some people know the words to songs they never tried to learn. When they brought her in, he was already in the unit. By midnight, Zara's rhythm was unstable in the specific way that means the heart is negotiating with itself. By 1:20 in the morning, those negotiations were failing. By 2, Dr. Biosolale had called in the full cardiac team, and the hallway outside room 11 had taken on the particular quality of a place where something is happening that cannot be rushed or reversed, only witnessed. 3 people were in that hallway. They had arrived together at 11:15, 40 minutes after Zara was admitted. Long enough that the night staff had already established a rhythm around her care, and had started to pay attention to things outside her room. The man was Cormac Holt, 34, tall, the kind of face that read as trustworthy, until you watched it for more than a few minutes, and noticed how rarely it changed when it should. He had walked in with one hand, holding a coffee he hadn't offered to share, and the other resting on the back of the woman, next to him in a way that had nothing to do with friendliness. The woman was introduced to the desk nurse as his sister, Blythe. She was wearing a silk blouse and small diamond earrings, and she looked at the hospital the way some people look at airports, with the mild irritation of someone who expected to be somewhere better by now. Olu Adisa was not the desk nurse that night. She was charting at the station 12 feet from where they were standing. She noted the introduction. She noted that Cormac's hand on his sister's back moved in a slow, deliberate circle when he thought no one was looking. The third person was Cormac's older brother Finn, 38, Queeter. Finn had said almost nothing since they arrived. He stood slightly apart from the other 2 and watched the door to room 11 with an expression that Olu could not quite categorize. Not grief, not detachment, something in between that she had learned over 14 years to track. At 12:40, Dr. Biosolale had stepped into the hallway to give an update. His face was the particular neutral of someone who has learned to deliver information without letting the delivery become the story. Zara's condition is serious, he said. We're working to stabilize her rhythm. These situations can shift quickly in either direction. Cormac had nodded with his arms crossed. He said, she's always had heart problems. We knew this was a possibility. We knew. Olu wrote nothing down. She watched the door close behind Dr. Biosolale, and she went back to her charting. At 1:55, she heard something she was not meant to hear. She was pulling a patient file at the cabinet beside the supply alcove. The alcove had a blind corner, and around that blind corner, Cormac Holt was on the phone. He hadn't seen her. His voice was low but not low enough, and the hallway at 1:55 in the morning was the kind of quiet that carries. She heard, if she doesn't pull through, the joint account defaults to me. I checked with the bank already. The house was refinanced in both names in February, so the equity is. She heard nothing after that. She didn't need to. She closed the cabinet carefully. She walked back to her station. She sat down. She looked at the door to room 11, and she thought about the woman on the other side of it who had called her own ambulance and climbed into the back of the vehicle alone. She thought about that for a long time. At 2:31, Zara's rhythm flatlined. Dr. Beausoleil and the cardiac team worked for 22 minutes. It was not quiet in room 11 during those 22 minutes. It was not loud either. It was the specific sound of people who know what they are doing, working at the outer edge of what can be done, which is its own kind of sound that you recognize the first time and never forget. At 2:53, the monitor in room 11 found something to hold on to. A rhythm. Uncertain at first, tentative, like a person stepping onto ice they're not sure will hold, then steadier, then real. Dr. Beausoleil stood at Zara's bedside and looked at the monitor for a long moment. He checked her pupils. He checked her pressure. He looked at the secondary screen that had updated with new data while his team had been working. He read it. He read it again. He stood very still. Then he walked to the doorway and looked into the hallway, and what he saw in the hallway was what Olu had been watching for the last 2 hours. Cormac with his coffee, Blythe with her earrings, Finn standing slightly apart. 3 people arranged like people who have decided what they are waiting for. At 3:05, Dr. Beausoleil came through the door. He said, "Zara's heart has stabilized." A silence. Cormac said, "Oh, thank God." The correct words in the correct order. 1 beat 2 measured. Blythe exhaled, touched her collarbone. Finn said nothing. His jaw moved slightly, like someone swallowing something he had decided not to say. Dr. Beausoleil said, "She's unconscious and we'll be keeping her sedated for the next several hours to reduce strain on her heart. She'll need to remain in the unit overnight." He paused. "There's something else I need to speak with all of you about. If you'd come with me?" He gestured toward the family consultation room at the end of the corridor. It was a small room with 4 chairs and a table, and a window with a curtain drawn across it. The kind of room that exists in hospitals for the specific purpose of sitting people down before telling them things that shouldn't be received standing up. Olu did not go into the consultation room. There was no reason for her to be there. She had charts to pull, medications to verify, a patient 3 doors down who needed his vitals checked at 3:15. She was at the nurse's station at 3:08, directly across from the consultation room window. When the curtain was not quite fully drawn, she could not hear the words. She watched the faces. She watched Dr. Beausoleil speaking in the careful, measured way he used when the information he was delivering required the listener to have space to absorb it. She watched Cormac's face move through something that was not what she would have expected relief to look like. It was more like recalculation, like a man who had been mentally building something and had just discovered the foundation wasn't what he'd ordered. She watched Blythe's hand tighten on her purse strap. She watched the hand relax. She watched it tighten again. She watched Finn. Finn looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked at Cormac. Olu had been a nurse for 14 years and she had learned to read the things faces do when people decide not to speak. Finn's face was doing that. What Dr. Beausoleil was telling them was this. When Zara had collapsed and been admitted, the triage team had run a full panel, standard for cardiac events in patients with known conditions. One of the panels had returned a result that had not been expected. It had been confirmed with a second test while the cardiac team was working. Zara was 11 weeks pregnant. The information had been withheld from the family while the team stabilized her condition, because the information was Zara's, and it would be Zara's to share or not share. When she was conscious and capable of making that decision, Dr. Beausoleil was informing the family now only because the pregnancy had affected the treatment protocol and would need to be part of the ongoing care conversation. He said all of this in his careful, neutral voice. He said Zara's decision, and Zara will need to be consulted multiple times, in ways that were deliberate. He had been a doctor for 25 years, and he knew the difference between delivering medical information and handing something over to people who had not earned it. Olu watched Cormac receive this information. Something crossed his face that she would think about on the drive home, and at dinner the next evening, and in the quiet before sleep for several nights after. It was not the expression of a man learning that his wife was pregnant. It was the expression of a man learning that a situation he had privately concluded was resolved had quietly added a variable he hadn't accounted for. Blythe looked at Cormac. Cormac did not look at Blythe. Finn looked at his hands. They filed out of the consultation room at 3:19. Cormac's jaw was set in the way of someone who has made a decision about their expression and is enforcing it. Blythe's heels were quieter on the linoleum than they had been on the way in. Finn walked out last and stood in the hallway and looked at the door to room 11. After a moment, Cormac turned toward the elevator. Not toward room 11. The elevator. Blythe followed him without being asked. Finn stayed where he was. Olu watched him stand there for a long moment. Then she went back to room 11 and stood in the doorway and looked at the woman in the bed. The oxygen mask. The monitor with its careful, steady line. The room that had been full of the sound of hard work and was now just quiet. She thought about the phone call she had heard. About joint accounts. About equity. About a woman who had called her own ambulance. And then there was nobody else in the vehicle. She had a decision to make. 14 years of nursing had not made it easier. It had just made it clearer. She made it. Zara Holt regained consciousness at 7:48 the following morning. The sedation had been lifted gradually, and she came up from it the way people do. Slowly, with stops and starts, the world reassembling itself around her in pieces. The first thing she saw when she was fully aware was a chair beside her bed that should have been empty and wasn't. Dr. Beozalel was sitting in it, not standing, not hovering at the foot of the bed with a chart, sitting, in the chair. Like someone who had decided this was where they were going to be for a while. Zara looked at him. She knew enough about hospitals from 3 years of cardiac monitoring to understand that sitting doctors mean something different than standing ones. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I died," she said. Her voice was rough from the oxygen mask. "You came close," he said simply. "Your heart stopped. We got it back. You have been unconscious for approximately 9 hours. She absorbed this. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the empty doorway. Cormac? He was here overnight. He left around 3:30. She received this without visible reaction, which was, Olu would note later, itself a kind of reaction. "There are some things I need to tell you," Dr. Beozalel said. "Are you ready? We don't have to do all of it now." "Tell me," she said. "All of it." He told her about the cardiac event. He told her about the 22 minutes. He told her about the stabilization and what it meant for the next few days of her care. He told her what she would need and what she should expect. Then he said, "There's something else that came up during your admission. One of your bloodwork panels returned an unexpected result." He told her she was pregnant. Zara Holt did not speak for a long time. She looked at the window. There was a gray February morning on the other side of it, the particular gray of southern Ontario in winter, flat and thorough, the kind of light that doesn't flatter anything. "How far?" she said. 11 weeks. She looked at her hands on the blanket. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the door. "Does Cormac know?" Dr. Beozalel was careful here. He told her that he had disclosed the pregnancy to the family in the context of explaining the treatment protocol. He told her that he had made clear to the family that all decisions regarding the pregnancy were hers alone. Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did he come back after you told them?" Dr. Beozalel said, "No." She looked at her hands again. Her face did something that he recognized, not from this patient, but from his years. The face of someone making a decision they have been moving toward without knowing it, and have just arrived at. "I want to speak to someone before I speak to Cormac," she said. "A lawyer, if that's something you can help with, or a social worker." "Someone. I can help with that," he said. No pause. She looked at him. "You already knew something, didn't you? When you came in and sat down." He considered this. "I knew what the tests showed. I know what my responsibilities are and what they are not." "Olu told you something," she said. A pause. "I'm not able to speak to that." "She's a good nurse," Zara said quietly. "Tell her I said so." The social worker came on day 2. Her name was Darien, and she had a practical, careful way of presenting options that made the options feel like doors rather than walls. She sat with Zara for an hour. She came back the next day. The lawyer came on day 3, a family lawyer who had worked with the hospital's patient advocacy program for 6 years. She sat with Zara for 2 hours. She asked questions and listened and took notes in a small leather notebook, and did not offer opinions that had not been asked for. By the time Cormac came on day 4, Zara had slept. She had eaten. She had received a visit from her own mother, who had driven in from Kingston and sat beside the bed for 8 hours, and said almost nothing, and was exactly what was needed. She had thought about 11 weeks. She had thought about what those weeks had looked like, and who had been in them, and what she now understood about what had been happening in the spaces. She had tried not to examine. She had thought about calling her own ambulance. Cormac came with flowers, real ones wrapped in the brown paper that means someone went somewhere specific to buy them. He stood in the doorway of room 11, with the flowers and the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed something and is now performing it. And he said her name the way people say names they have decided to load with meaning. Zara looked at him. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She didn't raise her voice once in the 40 minutes that followed. That was the thing Olu would remember later, standing at the station within earshot, not pretending to be out of earshot. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She spoke in the level, deliberate voice of someone who has already done the hard emotional work, and is now simply reporting the conclusions. She told him what she knew. She told him about the phone call that had been overheard. She told him that she had spoken to a lawyer. She told him that she had already begun the process of separating the joint finances, that the account had been flagged, that the house conversation was now a legal conversation, and not a personal one. She told him about the pregnancy. She watched his face when she did. He spoke for a long time after that. Some of what he said were apologies. They were uneven in quality, and she let him finish before explaining that she hadn't asked for them. Some of what he said were explanations, which she listened to with the same level attention she had been giving everything, which was the kind of attention that holds nothing back and judges nothing in real time, and simply receives. She told him about what she had decided regarding the pregnancy. She told him clearly and without asking for his input, because she had established with the lawyer what her rights were in that regard, and she was exercising them. He tried once to reframe the financial conversation. She let him finish. Then she told him the name of her lawyer and said that conversation would continue through them. He left. The flowers stayed. She moved them to the windowsill. She looked at the gray February light, and she thought about the next thing, and the thing after that, and the way a future looks when you stop trying to fit it around someone else's shape. Dr. Biosalil stopped by room 11 every day. For the 8 days Zara was in hospital. Not always long, sometimes just to check her chart and stand at the window for a moment. He had the manner of someone who understood that presence is itself a form of medicine, that sometimes what a patient needs is for a person who knows the full picture to simply be in the room. On day 6, in the quiet of the late afternoon, he sat in the chair beside her bed again. Zara said, without preamble, "You sat down the first morning." "Yes, you didn't have to." "No." She was quiet for a moment. "How many times have you done that?" "Sat down." He considered this. "When it seems like the right thing to do." "How do you know?" He looked at the window. 14 years ago, I didn't sit down when I should have. I've sat down every time I should have since." She looked at him. She didn't ask what he meant. Some things don't need to be unwrapped. On day 7, Finn came. He came alone, mid-afternoon, and he stood in the doorway of room 11, with the uncertain look of someone who is not sure they have the right to be there. He was holding a coffee from the Tim Hortons in the lobby, one in each hand, and he looked at Zara in the bed and said, "I didn't know if you'd want company, but I brought 2 just in case." She looked at him for a moment. "Leave one on the table," she said. He sat in the chair beside the bed. "Not in the chair, doctor," Biosalil used, "but the one further back, the one that says I know this is your space and I'm not claiming it." He held his coffee in both hands and looked at the window. "I want to say something," he said. "Okay." I knew something was wrong. Between the two of them. I knew for a while. He looked at his hands. "I didn't say anything. To you or to anyone. I told myself it wasn't my business." He stopped. "That wasn't the right call. I've been trying to figure out how to say that since that night in the hallway." Zara looked at him. "You're saying it now," she said. He nodded. He looked at the window. After a while he said, "She's not his sister." "I know," Zara said. Another quiet. "You called the ambulance yourself," Finn said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes." He held his coffee with both hands and said nothing for a while. Outside, a cold afternoon was doing what cold afternoons do in Ontario in February, which is to give you the specific kind of light that makes everything look like the day before something changes. "You're going to be okay," he said finally. "I know," she said again. And this time she meant it in a different way. She was discharged on day 8 with a cardiac monitoring schedule. a follow-up plan, and a list of things she needed to do that was long and practical and entirely manageable. Her mother drove her home. They stopped at a Tim Hortons on the highway and got soup because her mother believed that soup solved things that nothing else could touch, and she was not entirely wrong. They sat in the parking lot and ate the soup, and her mother didn't say anything for a long time. And Zara looked at the gray highway median and thought about 11 weeks and what comes after. "What are you going to do?" her mother finally asked. "Everything I should have done 6 months ago," Zara said, "and some things I couldn't have done until now." Her mother nodded. She finished her soup. She started the car. What happened after was not simple. It was not clean. These things rarely are. The finances took 4 months to fully separate. The house took 7. Cormac contested one thing and then another, and then each of those things was addressed by the lawyer with the small leather notebook and her 6 years of patient advocacy experience, and eventually the contesting stopped. Zara left Whitby. She moved to a neighborhood in Hamilton, where she knew 2 people and did not know her neighbors yet. And the lake was 20 minutes away on foot, and she started walking to it most mornings, because her cardiologist had told her that steady movement was good for the heart, in ways that were still being fully understood, and she believed him. The pregnancy resolved itself in a way that she had chosen and that she carried quietly and without regret, because it was hers to carry. She kept working. She was a high school music teacher, and she went back to her classroom in April and stood in front of 23 teenagers with French horns and clarinets and a general indifference to proper embouchure, and it was exactly as ordinary and necessary as she needed it to be. She heard from Finn twice in the months that followed. Once in March, a text that said only, "I hope things are better." No reply needed. She replied anyway. Once in May, a call that lasted 20 minutes and covered nothing important and was entirely comfortable. She did not hear from Cormac. She had arranged for that to be the case. Dr. Biosolel saw her in clinic every 8 weeks. Her cardiac rhythm remained stable. On her 3rd visit, she brought him a coffee from the Tim Hortons in the medical building lobby, one of those automatic purchases that becomes a kind of language. He accepted it. They sat in the clinic room with the paper-covered table and the chart on the screen and the steady routine of monitoring, which is its own kind of caring, the kind that shows up on schedule whether or not there is anything dramatic to address. "You look better," he said. "I feel it," she said. He reviewed her data. He made a note. He looked at the monitor readout, which was steady, which was what it was supposed to be. "You called the ambulance yourself that night," he said. He was not looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the readout. "Yes," he nodded slowly. "That's the thing people don't understand about cardiac events. The first decision is usually the one that matters." He made another note. "A lot of people wait. They talk themselves out of it. They think it will pass." She thought about the kitchen floor in Whitby, the dinner dishes, the moment when the world started narrowing at the edges and she had walked to her phone without deciding to. "I didn't think about it," she said. "I just did it." "Yes," he said, "that's usually how it works." He closed the chart. He looked at her. He had the expression of someone who has seen many things over many years and has become selective about which of them they name. "You're doing well," he said. "I know," she said. She drove home along the highway with the lake to her left and the city softening behind her, and the kind of afternoon that February never manages, but March sometimes does. Light with some intention in it. Some quality that suggests the season knows where it's going. She had bought a used piano for the apartment, nothing fancy. A small upright with 3 sticky keys and a tone that was imperfect in a way she found charming. She played it most evenings after dinner, not practicing anything, just playing the way you talk to yourself, loosely, without an audience, letting the thing think out loud. She was not fine in the simple, finished way the word implies. She was fine in the ongoing way, the compound way, the way that means showing up for the next thing and then the next, which is all fine ever really means. The cardiac monitor on her wrist tracked her rhythm the way it always did. Steady, consistent, present. She had called the ambulance herself that night. She had climbed into the back of the vehicle alone. She had come through the other side of something that had been trying to finish her in more ways than one. The sticky keys were C-sharp, F and B flat. She worked around them. Some things you work around, some things you fix, The skill is knowing which is which, and that skill, like most real skills, takes longer than anyone tells you and costs more than you expect, and is worth exactly what you paid for it. She played until the light changed. Then she stopped. Then she started again.